Segments. So here we can create segments. This gives you an overview. Under a lot of these different features, you'll see this overview tab. It'll default to that, and it has some information on how to get started and some documentation, video here. If I click on the Browse tab, that's going to show me the segments that I have already created. And again, one of the things that we'll be doing later on is actually creating these schemas, but just to let you know where you get to those schemas at. Then we have our identities, and again, defaults to the Overview tab. I'm going to go to Browse here. And what identities are and identity namespaces are the type of information that we're going to bring together our data on. And again, we have a module that'll cover this in a bit more detail. A new feature right here is Identity Graph. It lets us know it's still in beta. I'm going to click on that. So right now, I don't have an identity selected. I could choose an identity here, but again, we'll take a look at this in a module later on. And but this is how you get to that identity graph. And the identity graph will show the connections that exist between your different identities. And like I say, we'll be taking a look at that in a little bit. The next category down is privacy. And I'm going to click on policies here. Under policies, we have different policies that have been created. You'll get typically policies out of the box. You can extend those to meet your own company's requirements around data governance. Here, notice we'll have these labels like C2 and C3, and then we can go and see what some of the other ones are. Oops, I guess that's it for that. Let me click on labels here, and here you can actually see what the friendly name is for these symbols. So C1, aggregated, export only. Come down here a little bit, I1, directly identifiable data. So one of the things that we have is the system of labels that are used to say what different types of data can be used for what and by whom. And so this is where that gets set up. Notice that I can create a new label over here on the right. Marketing actions are associated with those different identities. And so, is it going to be for analytics? Is it going to be for data science? Is it going to be for email targeting? And so these marketing actions combined with the different labels, which are the representatives, those are the associated labels with the actual policies, determine the end result as to what happens with that data or what can happen with that data. We also have over here under privacy requests. I'm going to click on requests. And this screen allows you to do a number of things, but one of the important things that it lets you do is to identify certain data, remove certain data. So let's say somebody calls up your company and says, I want to know what data you have on me. We could pull that with one of these job requests and then let the person know what data we have. We can also delete that data from this window. Notice up over here, regulation type. So we have the different current regulations. So GDPR, for example, and the CCPA, which is the fairly new California law on privacy. And down here you can see this is for Thailand and so on and so forth. So different companies are creating their different regulations around privacy, and so hopefully you'll have someone at your company that is aware of which of these regulations your company needs to follow. And again, for a global company, there could be different regulations for the operations of your company in different countries or regions of the world. But you can select all of those that are. We have a whole team out of Adobe that is constantly monitoring the privacy regulations, not only the governmental regulations, but also the recommendations that have been put out by various professional organizations and so forth. So we have a whole team that is monitoring that on a continuous basis. All right. Well, let me go back over to platform here. And by the way, I wanted to mention before I go back over to platform, whenever I see a new window, I try to always remind myself to check what instance or org am I working with and make sure I'm in the right one. Well, when I went to the privacy service, it opened a new tab, so I'm just going to close that tab and that'll take me back to the platform UI. And now let's move to another category, and that'll be the data science category. It takes a little while for the notebooks, Jupyter Lab, and the various kinds of notebooks that Jupyter notebooks that can be opened up. Rather than taking that time right now, we're going to be coming back in Module 5 to data science, and we'll be looking at each one of these here. The notebooks will actually go into a notebook and generate a training on data. We'll save the results as a model and so forth. So we'll get back into this, but it does take a little time for these to spin up and be available. So rather than taking that time right now, we'll just wait till Module 5 on that. Data management, really a crucial section. We have right here schemas, and again takes you to the overview page. Notice in the upper right over here, we can create a new schema. We can browse our different schemas here, and I got a search field for finding a particular schema. We have our different classes that the schemas are built on. We have something called mix-ins here, the full list of mix-ins, and then for the different fields we have our different data types here that so notice here's a string, a namespace, and so on and so forth. Once again, we're going to be in a later module coming in and looking at schemas and talking a bit more about classes and mix-ins, and we'll see some of the data types in the different schemas. Down here I'm going to click on data sets, and again the overview page. Notice we could create a data set here, and we could browse our data sets. Now all of the data sets have a schema that is the structure of the data set. So what the schema does is it says how the data in the data set is going to be constructed, how the data is going to be held, and what data can be held. And again, we're going to be looking at different data sets, and we'll also look at the schemas for those data sets and get a sense of how those schemas are built in a later module. Notice over here on the right, so here we got a creation date, and notice that we have these different schemas, and so we can go to those different schemas, which we will, and see how they're constructed, and then see how that matches up with the data in the data set. Okay. Now, most of your schemas are going to be built on XDM, and we'll see that again when we get back to the schemas. It is possible to have a schema built and data set in a data set that is not an XDM schema, but really that is not preferred. So XDM schemas have to be used when you want to bring data from a particular data set and bring it into a profile and combine data from other data sets into this unified individual profile. So the XDM schema is really important. For the most part, you want to have your data sets based on XDM schemas. Next, under data management over on the left, we have, and by the way, I'm not sure I'm mentioning it all the time, but for a lot of these different views, you'll get a sidebar that opens up. And another thing that's a little bit tricky, but we'll be doing this a few times, is if I click on the link for one of these data sets, let's just pick this one here, it'll actually go to a different window for that data set. Okay, let me go back. And that was for, I think it was for the call center, which is, where did it go? Let me do a search for it here. And I think it was this one right here. But if I go to that row and I move off of the blue link and click somewhere else along this row, then I'll get a different view. What I'll get is over in the right, a sidebar in the right, that gives me some summary information about that particular data set. So notice here it shows the schema. It also shows the schema here. So again, where along this row you click, or actually there's two places. There's just along the row somewhere like that, or on the link for that particular data set. It'll take you to different screens depending. And again, we'll be doing that and get used to that hopefully a little later on. Queries. I'm going to click Browse here, and I could look to browse. I don't see any queries right here that have been saved as a query, so I could reuse that query based on how I saved it, the name I saved it with. Log will give me a list of all the queries that I have run within a particular time. So these haven't been saved with the name, but they are still available, and we could rerun these queries here. Again, if I click on the row for a query, I'll get this sidebar over here in the right that gives me some summary information about the query. And we'll be working with queries quite a bit. We have a good chapter that really covers queries, at least as an introduction, pretty thoroughly. If I go to the Credentials tab, here are the credentials that I need to be able to make a connection to the query service from, say, another tool. It could be a an application that your company has developed, or we're going to actually be using this to make a connection from a third-party tool. And I'll be showing you that.